What happens when someone who worked as a head chef in one of the best restaurants in the world, Noma, starts going deep down the rabbit hole of sustainability and responsibility? Welcome to a fascinating journey of one of the most interesting chefs in the world, who not only redefined what a circular, sustainable restaurant means. No, it's not more expensive to run, and it doesn't require a lot of tech, but it does require a completely new mindset and way of thinking. He shares some fascinating examples of data, monetary savings, for example, 17,000 euros a year in water costs, which is only possible because of a mindset shift. We talk about the role of fine dining and the hospitality world in transforming the agri-food system and the role of technology and, of course, fermentation, and the VC-funded BS in food tech and fermentation. We discuss their new restaurant concept, which is still very much under wraps, but very exciting, but also how they're disrupting the very dirty cacao and chocolate industry with an upcycled, fully organic, price-neutral spent brewer's grain, which you can already find in quote-unquote chocolate cookies in the Nordics, without tasting the difference. This is a long one, but worth it. Listen to it when you prepare a meal, are gardening, or anything else, but most importantly, enjoy. This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, where we learn more on how to put money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities, and ecosystems, while making an appropriate and fair return. Welcome to another episode, today with chef, entrepreneur, and the former head chef of Noma, and the founder behind Amass, one of, if not the most circular restaurant in the world, and fully organic. It closed at the end of 2022, to focus on a project in Singapore. And now he's back in Denmark. He's very busy, and among many other things, which we're going to talk about, a new restaurant here in Copenhagen. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
And we always start with a personal question, and you already alluded to in the pre-conversation that might be dangerous with a chef. How come you spend most of your waking hours, and I'm guessing also your sleeping hours, thinking about ruminating, fermentating food, and in your case, actually also soil and ag? Like, what led you into this magical world of chefs, food, farms, and food system change even?
Well, my wife can attest to even sleeping hours, because she'll often wake up and I'll be like on my phone and she's like, "What are you looking at?" I'm like, "How do trees speak to each other?" She's like, "Did you just go to sleep, you crackhead?" So I would say I'll come from a chef's perspective, and for a chef, obviously food and products are the most important thing, the quality of products, where they come from. And as soon as you start to deep dive into that, you see very quickly that the quality of product is directly connected to the quality of the soil that it's produced in.
Do you remember, because it seems so obvious from the outside.
I remember the exact moment, I can tell you.
Because it's so obvious from the outside, and I'm definitely not in the chef's world, and I had the great pleasure to be at MAD Symposium a few weeks ago, and because of Dan, thank you Dan. But that's really an interesting subculture in terms of chefs and how cool it became, and how the movement of hospitality really, not just because of Chef's Table, of course, that's how most people look at it, but it became a thing. And still there you saw the disconnect with the products and where the products come from. But from the outside, we come from a farming perspective. It's like, obviously it's the seed, the farmer, the soil that leads to a great tasting tomato. And then, of course, how you cook it is not so important, which of course the chef's like, no, that's the starting point, and then you work backwards. Like, there's this interesting disconnect between when the product gets through the door of the kitchen, like suddenly it changes or something, the dimension changes. You say, do you remember when provenance or terroir or whatever we want to call it became a thing? Or was it always just a very logical, which it seems like?
It's not logical, because you are right in saying that chefs are widely disconnected from where their food comes from. And you can say, "Oh, I know the farmer, and the farmer comes to the back door," and blah, 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 all that stuff, and that's all romantic. But unless you're standing out there and feeling it, you really don't understand what it is. And the exact moment for me, I was with a friend named Mikkel. He had a company called Spiesman Grease that sold meat, only organic. The person we were at in this particular day, his name was Ole. We called him the cow whisperer. He had a very small herd of cattle, and we were out in the field with Ole and Mikkel, and I brought my whole team out there to kind of see what was going on, and they were walking quite far ahead of Mikkel and myself, and the sun was kind of low in the sky, and Mikkel's like, "Check this out." And we were like in a field with like grass up to our waist, and the cows are moving around. and it's clover and alfalfa. It's just a wild field of.
It's not a green desert.
No, exactly. And Mikkel's like, come here. And we're away from everyone. And he's like, check this out. And he's like, bend down. And we bent down and we were at like eye line with the top of the grass. And there was just hundreds of thousands of bugs flying around. And he's like, this is organic. And I was like, my head just exploded. And he reached down and he like grabbed a handful of like, pulled a bunch of the grasses out and was like, look at this dirt. It's like sticking together and dark. He's like, this is it. Like we talk about organic and no pesticides and blah, 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 blah. He's like, organic is creating a functional ecosystem that thrives on each other. And he's like, this is it. I've tried to explain it to you in words. He's like, but this for me is the best way to explain it to you. And my brain just like exploded. And that's what really took me down the rabbit hole of really trying to understand what is food, what is soil, how do they interact with each other. And through that, it's obviously, it can take you down multiple rabbit holes and how it affects our microbiome and brain activity and
including at night scrolling.
10 hours or what?
how trees talk to each other. Let's see how long the battery lasts. But we can make it work. And did that land at that point, because he said I brought the full team here as well, with the team as well, like how is that notion of like you had that moment in the field looking at basically a field full of life. I still think the slogan, I mean, shout out to Wild Farmed, is one of the best one. Like this is food full of life, like literally a farm full of life and a pasture full of life. And anyway, our gut system full of life, etc. I'm a very small investor. I have to be, I'm biased obviously, but did it like, how do you convey that, or how do you make sure, or how do you enable, it's probably a better word, other people to have the same in your kitchen, in your teams, in the office of a restaurant, in like the whole, because if it's just quote unquote the crazy chef, it's great, but it's maybe going to stop there. Like how do you enable it? Like people have that same experience or a similar experience to have that same moment of, okay, wow, this is about functional ecosystems, abundance, full of life, and that creates the food that we end up serving in a very nice restaurant with a white tablecloth and all the fanciness around it. But it starts there in a messy, like objectively.
Preferably messy.
Preferably, if it's not messy, it's not good. Field, is that difficult to, this is a very long question, I realize it, to have other people in your team or in your teams and around you see that as well?
Well, in that immediate moment, which lasted about a minute of Mikkel and I just having this non-conversational moment together, looking at these hundreds of thousands of bugs.
It was a lightning moment, basically.
Yeah. Without saying anything, I set out on a full sprint across the field to catch my team.
Scaring the cows, probably.
Yeah. All those cows were unscarable. They were just so docile and moving around. Yeah. And to say, everyone, you got to see this. And I grabbed everyone and sat everyone down to the grass and was like, check this out. And so you can have those moments. Obviously, you can't have your guests experience that.
But did it click then for the team? Did you see different reactions to?
I would say, my wife always says, like, you always want people to understand things how you understand it. My wife's always like, you're a little bit psychotic as well. So maybe people won't fully grasp it as passionately as you will. But there was definitely a few of them that were like, wow.
Because it's interesting, because they walked through the field and until they got on their knees, they didn't see that.
You don't see it.
Exactly. Or you hear it.
Exactly. But I think that's like a metaphor for all of this that's happening. So many things are happening that we don't see every day. And because we are a species that don't really acknowledge anything unless we can physically see it or touch it, then it doesn't exist. And it doesn't matter how many times people talk to you about it.
Biodiversity went down.
Exactly. So it's sad. As soon as you see it and experience are in it, then it becomes real. And then you can start having thought processes about it. But until then, it's really hard to convey that experience or even the existence of that happening around us.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. How do we, of course, in the investment world, in the finance world, the entrepreneur world, the food company world, like, how do you have people have that experience without bringing them to the farm? Maybe it's not possible. And we're going to talk about the food role in that, the hospitality world, because the best thing is to come to, and luckily we have in Western Europe or actually in all over Europe and many other places, you have places you can go to, you can see the difference. Like the field next door looks and sounds and feels very different compared to the farm you visit. So if you can, I almost always end these conversations with go and visit the farm, spend time and listen, not only to the farmer, very important, but also to the insects. But if that doesn't happen, like if the investor or the person doesn't come to the farm, can we bring the farm to the investor? And I've been thinking about, okay, what do we do with these, I don't know, VR goggles? Like how do you bring, like just to understand and hear and sound and listen to the difference between a field full of life and a field without any life, which might still be organic, but you can sense the difference, or a forest that is maintained very differently compared to a monoculture forest. And I remember we had something on chestnuts a long time ago. No, not so long. Actually, on chestnuts investments around Propagate. I will put it in the links below. And he just made a small video. I think he put it on LinkedIn. Just they planted chestnuts and they filmed simply the insect activity on that field. So they planted a cover crop and chestnuts. And the sound is just amazing compared to a next door field, which just says, hey, silence, obviously. He said, just that, like bring the investors to that place, either through a video, very small iPhone one, like nothing, but the sound difference is already amazingly different compared to. But now we get to the role of food. Like he said the guests obviously we cannot bring all the guests to the farm. You can do amazing dinners on a farm. But let's say you're in a big city, like here, 1.3 million people. So then how did you, from that moment on, try to bring that experience or part of the experience without bringing all the insects to the restaurant? Like how did your thinking change, I think is the question, in terms of how to convey that message through the food, through the experience, through the table and everything that happens on top of that?
Yeah. A restaurant is, people think because you have a restaurant, you have a platform to talk about whatever you want to that you're passionate about. But a restaurant is a challenging arena to
that was my whole emphasis of this conversation. You're saying that. We're not going there. Okay. You're saying that if you talk about soil the whole time in a restaurant, people might not like it.
Well, a restaurant is a difficult arena to talk about things because you think you have people's, this amazing carrot, you can talk. A restaurant is first and foremost a restaurant. Like people go there to eat and drink wine.
And enjoy themselves.
And we want to think about a restaurant as this ethereal kind of place where we can preach and stand on a platform and talk about and that's true to some people that go there, but not all. So therein lies the challenge of how do you communicate about this within a restaurant? Because then all of a sudden you're trying to read your guests at a level that normally don't have to read. Does this person really care about the microbiome and how it connects to the soil? Probably 2% of your guests do.
Which if you have a small restaurant, there are not so many people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is, we always talk about it at Amass, especially like where are the challenges in communicating about what we do? And that was one of them. Of course, there are people, we actually got a complaint letter one time because we didn't communicate enough about what we did. So you're like,
amazing.
Let me just shoot myself in the head right now because
those are like, okay, come back please, and we'll do 3 hours on this.
I will take you to the farm and we will talk about exactly what we're doing. So communicating in a restaurant setting is challenging. What I found personally a bit more efficient is that a restaurant is a restaurant, and of course we operate in a very specific way based on the things and the values that we hold. But you can talk about it aggressively around the dining experience, visually on the walls. You can do it in a way where people who are interested will engage based on what they're looking at around them. And then, okay, there's a way in.
So you invite people can literally or figuratively raise their hand or what, instead of just preaching to everyone.
Exactly.
That is forced to sit there because they're in your restaurant.
First of all, there's a fine line between preaching and informing. You never want to preach. I want to preach. I want to stand up there and give a sermon on soil every day.
But then your wife says no.
My wife is like, my wife and I have worked together for 18 years. We ran Amass together. We worked at Noma together. We worked at Per Se in New York together. And she's front of the house. She's also the realist. I'm like, we can do everything all the time. She's like, we can do everything, but just not all the time. We can do it.
I understand the family. We've been running the podcast and everything else together. I understand the dynamics. Yeah, yes. It's great and it gives amazing opportunities, and it's challenging at the same time because it never stops and it goes on in the middle of the night, and it goes on when you're but it makes a lot of things possible. So if it works, it's really powerful.
Exactly.
But front of the house, obviously, she was and is like then responsible for that guest experience, and of course doesn't want somebody to stand on a food crate and talk about soil for 2 hours. Yeah.
Exactly. She's like, if you want to do that, you can do it outside of the restaurant all you want. And so, but that's a great observation. So myself, I aggressively engage outside of the restaurant because that ultimately sets the platform for what the restaurant's all about. Because
Who comes in?
Who comes
already?
Yeah, not at first, but in the end, people were really coming to Amass for the exact reason.
Because that changed, right? Because when you started Amass, was that already, and I'm sorry, I'm not in the chef's world so much, like when you started, was that like not aggressive, but such a focus, the circularity, the organic space? Because that was a transition, right?
A transition.
Look, I did my prep.
Yeah. So Amass, when we opened, I was actually so, I would say, anti-Nordic, because I didn't.
Coming from Noma, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yes. But I think when you do something so extreme, your immediate reaction is when you do your own thing, is do something the opposite of that.
Like children and parents. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm scared for my children.
Exactly. But ironically, fast forward 10 years, Amass was the most Nordic restaurant you could ever imagine because we were 99% Danish ingredients aside from the 1% of like Norwegian fish we would get or stuff like that.
How did that then, like that transition, which is so fascinating, you start with saying, I'm going to be the exact opposite on the other side of the spectrum and really serve the most amazing.
We had foie gras on the menu when we opened. What the fuck?
I didn't want to go there, but like that and I don't know, the best, I'm just like Angus from wherever, Uruguay, like doesn't matter, fly it in, we're fine. And then when did that start to... Like, did you see a movie? Was it a gradual process? Like, okay, let's switch on olive oil and do something else?
Immediate. We were open for 6 months. We had our first closure. We were closed for 3 weeks in the winter. And I was having a coffee with a friend, and she asked me, Evelyn Kim, thank you, Evelyn, for planting the seed. And she says, you're open now, you're going, your systems are in place. Like, what's next? And I was like, what's next? I'm like, I want to cook good food, be creative, make people happy. Like, it's a restaurant. But in that same sentence, the word responsibility popped into my head. I didn't even acknowledge it or say it. I just was like, what? Okay, whatever. We just kept having our conversation. For the next 2.5 weeks, we were closed. That word just permeated my entire like being. And I wanted to understand what that responsibility meant in the context of a restaurant, because I had never worked at a restaurant where that word was part of the vocabulary at all. And so trying to understand, and I was like, well, how do I start? Like, what do I do to embody this word that will not leave my brain? And I remember coming back, the whole team was back, we were opening 3 days later. And I sat down in front of the team and I was like,
chaos already.
I was like, okay, so we've been open 6 months, we have systems in place, we're going in the right direction. Now we're going to forget about everything we've done in the last 6 months. And we're going to start over. And everyone just looked at me and they're like, have you spent the last 3 weeks in Christiania? Like, what are you
Which is
doing?
a free town here in Copenhagen, just background. Yeah, what have you been smoking, using? What kind of ayahuasca trip did you go on?
Yeah. And so I said, well,
which is funny from like, sorry to interrupt, but it's interesting because the systems, she was right. And like the systems are in place. So it's probably, I'm not saying the easier moment to do it, but if you do it from the start and you have to put all the systems in place and run a new location that for sure there are 10,000 things that don't work and all the other, like those kind of like early issues and challenges are out.
Yeah.
Now you were quote unquote changing the menu, changing the menu, which with everything else working, at least all the stoves were working and everything else like was flowing.
Well, I'll push back on that. Changing the menu is the easy part. So the words I said to the team, I was like, okay, so every decision we make now, we are going to put the phrase, is this the most responsible version of this decision? Of course, it's a restaurant, so sometimes you make decisions on the fly. And of course, you can't always make the most responsible decision in the moment. But if we make a decision that's not the most responsible one, we then meet afterwards and make a plan to get to the most responsible version of that decision. So it based on this word responsibility. And we started to put that in front of everything. How we were cooking, obviously that the immediate response to that is where the product's coming from, which before wasn't a big thing. So then we started to just retract from, we took foie gras off the menu, obviously, because that's not the most responsible thing to put on the menu.
Probably, yeah.
And we started to retract back into Denmark and Scandinavia and started to look at the farmers we were using, how they were actually growing their vegetables. So that was the initial, like, boom, that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
That's there. Then we started to look at how we were cooking, okay? How much were we actually throwing away of the products that were coming in? And there's also a thing in Scandinavia that in basically just January till April, every restaurant cooks with the same 5 ingredients: beets, onions, carrots, potatoes, turnips. And
If you want to do regional, let's say seasonal,
yeah, exactly.
because if you don't want to bring anything from outside, that's pretty much the
you're
Nordic.
tied to what you're.
Yeah.
So how do we differentiate ourselves from the other 20 restaurants using the same ingredients for these?
Because after
4 months a
Noma
year?
or with Noma, of course, there was this movement of these kind of restaurants doing those things.
Yeah.
Going back 1 second, when you opened Amass for the first 6 months, did you get any pushback or any of your former colleagues and friends from the Nordic cuisine? It's like, what are you doing? Why do you bring foie gras from everywhere and everywhere? Or was it a very logical sort of jump into, okay, let's do something completely different?
Back then, no. Now I would have, because there's a different way of thinking about cooking from this region. But so
what do you do in winter, like end winter, basically,
Yeah.
until spring? Yeah.
So we were looking at these vegetables, and you can ferment and dry and pickle, blah, blah, blah. But then I started thinking the skins of these vegetables, which are generally moved every time you prepare them, because they're quite rough because they've been in the ground, contain the most interesting parts of the vegetable from a nutrient perspective. So if the nutrients are different than the internal part of it, the compounds are different. So if we apply different fermentation methods to it, whether it's lactic, koji-based, or yeast-based, the flavors are going to be different that come out of it. So then we started drying, rehydrating, fermenting, drying, and rehydrating, like all these of the stems, the skins, the seeds of all these different, and we started to come up with new flavor profiles. So not to say that, I just want to make it clear that from a chef's perspective, we were doing this to find flavor. And the byproduct of the search for flavor was the whole circular way of cooking.
And the nutrient, like I remember having this discussion or conversation with Dan Barber, the last one when we had him on. I will put it in the links below as well, like on the word processing or on like what's the role of chefs to take, in this case, a carrot or whatever, and almost, not upcycle is not the right word here, but like unlock more nutrients than you would have before if you just eat it raw or whatever, simple cooked, quote unquote. Again, I'm not a chef. But you unlock because of fermentation, you unlock because of the processing, and in this case, actually you get a more nutrient, plus you use something that would have gone away, in the best case, maybe some broth, but let's say it would have been thrown away, because how many carrots do you peel? What happens with that? Oh, we make compost, great. But actually you unlock a whole different, and it's even more nutritious than the carrot potentially
100%.
itself. And then you get into a very interesting cycle.
And not only more nutrient dense, but oftentimes more delicious.
And that's, sorry, yeah, I of course forgot the flavor piece, and even more delicious, which is like 3-4 levels up from, okay, you don't like the term zero waste or minimum waste, circular, etc., but it has to taste amazing.
Yes.
Like it cannot be like, oh, this,
Well,
we cook you some leftover, good luck.
There you go. But so you can view sustainability or how, whatever you want to call it, through many different lenses. And we at the restaurant choose to view sustainability through the lens of deliciousness, which is the most important.
How many people are going to be moved by, we see that now with soil health and carbon and biodiversity even, at the end, we see a strong push and like how many people outside our little activist bubble are going to care about that unless it tastes amazing and it's good for you, it's not going to kill you or poison you.
Yeah. But you asked me earlier, how do you communicate this within the restaurant? And I can sit there and I can give my sermon on soil for the whole evening, or I can sit there.
Look at my slides, people. Yeah.
Or I can just sit there and feed you a delicious spoonful of something. that will catch your attention way quicker than if all the words that I'm saying to you. And a combination of those two, for the ones that are open to it, have a really strong impact.
And I'm guessing that people after that spoon of amazingly fermented, dehydrated, rehydrated, fermented again, etc., skin of or peel of carrots, more than the 1% is going to ask, what is this? Or how did you do this? What is this flavor that I never tasted before but makes me feel good because my body recognizes like, this is good stuff. It's full of life. Coming back to that, that's a much bigger percentage. Still not 100, that's fine. But even if it's 10% of people asking, then you have, then you cannot be there the whole time, obviously, doing that. So how do you train? Like, how does your staff, which sounds still like a war term, like the people running like having that interaction with the people at the table, how do you bring them on that they can give not the 2-hour soil seminar, but then actually engage when somebody says, how did you make, what is this? Why does it make me feel like my brain is popping out? How do you make sure the people that then can answer that question or actually can bring them on, like, we've been on the farm or we've fermented in this way, or how do you train your people then to be that interaction or that bridge between you in the kitchen and almost the farm?
I use the acronym AIR. So awareness, impact, responsibility.
Which was also the name of your project in Singapore, right?
Singapore, exactly.
People I do. Exactly. Sometimes I do web prep, not always. But in this case, and I remember words. I remember.
So AIR, awareness, impact, responsibility. So you can't even start to operate in this way unless you have awareness.
Talking about the people in your team.
In my team, exactly. AIR. And so awareness means a couple things. Awareness means the awareness of the impact of the actions that you are doing. It means awareness of the potential in things.
Your role in the world, your responsibility.
Exactly.
Of course, there's like,
exactly. And awareness also means being aware that you have to shift your mindset. So if you can get through all those three, then you have the potential to have impact. Once you have impact through awareness and changing changing your habits, changing your mindset, once you have impact, then you have a responsibility to share that impact with other people. And you only are able to share that impact with other people if you're able to talk about it and understand it. So you have to make it through the entire acronym of AIR before you can start to really be able to communicate it and share it.
And as you had a team in place after those first 6 months, did some people leave, or like how did some people not like, okay, I just want to serve foie gras? Like what did that clash, click, engage or not? And did you find out, like, how did that land?
Well, I definitely had a few initial eye rolls.
We just got it going.
But I would say, no one left. And everyone actually really embraced it once we started to talk about it as a team. Because I'm also I like to involve the entire team in big decisions like this, because of course I have my views and how I want to.
It didn't sound like that. It sounded like from now on we're going to do everything different. I don't know if there was like, I veto this, I'm the dishwasher.
Well, let me see. Yes, we're going to do everything different. And I'd like your input on how we do that. Because I also had no idea. No one had ever worked at a restaurant like this.
Yeah.
So no one had any reference point. So we all had to start to feel it out. And initially it's easy, just that is part of the cooking. Because that's the easy part. Everyone always thinks this is hard. The cooking part of it is not hard. It's using techniques that exist. It's just the whole idea of this. The most difficult part is the psychology of it. You really have to, your mindset has to shift in such a dramatic way. In the restaurant industry, you are taught repeat. So when you have a team full of chefs in their late 20s to mid 30s, these are people that have been cooking for a while now, and they have their habits in place. To shift that is quite difficult. It was the most difficult part of the equation.
Do you have an example on that? It's funny because if you change the word chef for farmer and restaurant for farm, I've heard many farmers say the technical parts of regen farming, not super easy, but definitely very possible. We now have a lot of places you can go for inspiration, etc., etc. but the mindset needed to apply them at the right moment, the right time, in the right emergence, in the right facilitating life, basically, because that's what you're doing, is like, I think Gabe Brown even says it, the most difficult real estate is between your ears. To change that, because you're going from killing and trying to make something grow that desperately wants to die to keeping things alive and managing a very different. Like, do you have an example, or for sure more, like in that mindset shift in the kitchen that just took it from like 180 basically in terms of there's the peels of the carrot, obviously, and what do we do late or early spring?
Yeah. Well, I'll even go to a simpler ingredient, water. So
I'm so curious where you're going with this.
So at Amass, we would put water bottles on the table and still or sparkling, and people could pour their own water. We'd come around and pour the water themselves.
Please don't tell me it was like this Nestle water from Italy, Aquapan or something.
Definitely.
Which, how did they do that? I've drank bottled Italian water. Sorry, I'm going to do a rant now.
Do it.
In the US, I'm like, is there a boat that crossed with bottles?
Of course
Which
so.
sounds...
Maybe a plane.
Which sounds like the most, like on top of an ocean, a boat full of anyway, okay, so no, obviously not. So people could pour.
We had filtered water.
Yeah.
So we would have, often there'd be, as this water bottle sitting in front of us, there's some water left on the table. They haven't touched it, it's in the water bottle. We'd have different like ice baths to wash vegetables. We would then strain that out. So we would save all of our excess water, about 100 liters a day, that we would divert from going down the drain. We would take that water, we would boil it, and we would use it to wash our floors. And that...
How did you come up with that?
Is like right in front of you all the time. I don't even know. I can't even remember the origins of that one. We just started doing it one day. But the hurdle of if you're next to a sink or even like with an ice bath or something, you're chilling down poached herbs, just like you take the herbs out and you just dump
The
it.
logistics are interesting because
And
like many of these bars have the constant water running, like to clean the glasses, and the sink just goes.
Yeah,
like that's a few thousand liters a day.
Exactly. So
then do you get it out of the sink? Like, how do you do that?
it never should go in the sink. So you then are now having to like take first of all, you have to make it convenient. So we had a massive bin that said water on it, and we had one in the back and one in the front. So you didn't have to take too many steps to get to it. So all the water would go in there. At the end of the night, it would be taken and get boiled, and then we would use it. It came to a point, so obviously in the beginning, every time I heard water hit the sink, I'd be like, what are you doing? They're like, oh no, my gosh, I'm sorry. So it was this process. In the end, because we had a lot of interns coming in that were obviously, that's even more challenging. You have new people coming in all the time that you're trying to, if water hit the sink, the entire kitchen would stop and look at this person and be like,
what did I do? Was it champagne? What did I do?
Yeah. So at the end, it was so integrated that it was like nails on a chalkboard when water hit the sink. But that was the first one where I was like, when I just kept hearing it hit the sink in the beginning, you're just like, why don't you people understand what's going on here? But and then at the end of the night, when you pull 100 liters of water out of the back that you've been saving up and you show it to everyone, because 500 mils here, a liter there, it doesn't, people don't understand it.
Like the soil washing away, like erosion, but you don't see it.
You don't see it. And so when you show a aggregated mass of something at the end of the night, 100 liters, and then you quantify that over a year and you give this enormous number, then people are like, oh, there is impact. I am having impact by doing this.
You still have to boil it though. So there's an impact analysis you could have done there to figure out, okay, is it worth it boiling and then using it, or wasting the 100 liters? And then of course the water you needed to have hot anyway.
So in the beginning we boiled it, but then we found a compound that sterilized it in the end that we could just add to it. Then we washed the floor with. Yeah.
Because then you needed God knows how many liters of water anyway to wash the floor. So there's that double.
So I always like to try to add a financial aspect to this because this is important. And I realized this when I first started to go out and give talks to people. There's something called the conference in Malmo every year. And I was speaking to like 900 people about what we were doing at Amass and all this stuff and giving statistics. And then I talked about this water and I said, in Denmark, you pay all your utilities in the beginning of the year based on last year. And then at the end, if you use less, then you get a refund. The first year we did this, we got a refund of 17,000 euro. And as soon as I said that at the conference, there's all these people like,
Half sleeping.
everyone's like, what? And I saw it happen. I was like, oh, now you're interested. So
know your audience, yeah.
Exactly. So
and in the restaurant business, I don't think most people might realize it, or if you invested in it or run places, it's a thin margin business. Like any 20 euros is important, and 17,000 definitely is. That's wow.
So that was also an eye opener about data, sharing data with your team, because then it becomes real. Like another example were egg whites. So it's a common practice where you take an egg, you put it in a circulator at 61 degrees, you cook for an hour and a half, you crack the egg open.
Audience, he's looking at me as like, this is super normal. I'm looking at, of course, I'm just nodding along. Yeah, it's a common practice, yeah.
Yeah, everyone does it at home. But you cook it at 61 degrees and then you crack it open and the whites are like raw, weird, that you rub away and you have this like really chewy egg yolk. And a lot of people use that on different variations.
And then what happens to the white?
Exactly. Yeah. So we went on a deep dive in the whites and really like broke down egg whites to their proteins. And we found that an egg white has over 100 different proteins, but only 12% of those proteins cook at 61 degrees. The 88% are still raw, suspended in these cooked egg whites. So what we would do is we'd save all the egg whites at the end of the night and we would put them through a very fine strainer and raw egg whites would come out that we could use again for meringues or whatever. And then the solid cooked ones we would take and make garums out of it because you need a protein in replace of soybeans when you make a garum. And so, but
it's like
when you
R&D, basically, research.
So, but what you have during service from a practical point of view is this young chef in the middle of service when it's really busy, cracking these eggs, trying to clean the egg whites off of them, cursing my name at the same time. Like, what am I doing here? And then I said, okay, at the end of the night, let's weigh these egg whites. 500 grams of egg whites at the end of the night. And then we say, okay, let's quantify that over 1 year, how many services we do. And then you look at this kid and say, this annoying action that you're doing every night has yielded a half a ton of product that would have been thrown away that we've now turned into something that
would have been, we would have bought it.
Yes. So, and then they're like, ding. And so you have to give context to the actions that people are taking to make them understand it. So I never thought I'd use the word data as much as I do as a chef. And I love data, all sorts. We had a LCA every year at the restaurant because those touch points in the LCA allow you to make like data-driven decisions on what to stop doing, what to not stop doing, and moving forward.
And so now you're working on a new place.
Yes.
What can you share about it? What do you want to share about it?
30,
it's behind here.
It's 30 meters from here. I would say what I can share, it's not
going to be
really
foie gras, probably. It's going to be
foie gras,
of course.
pigeon from France, all the good
golden spoons from wherever.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I cannot share the name yet. And what I can say is that there's a small group of us in the world, and I say small, like a handful of restaurants that I know, and I'm sure there's more out there than I know, that are pushing aggressively in this direction within the restaurant industry. And this restaurant, I really want to say this direction. What do you mean by this? I would say using the word responsibility as a core of running your restaurant. And for me, I really want to bring all of us together to have a stronger voice. And I just had a meeting with Lisa Abend, who is do you know who Lisa Abend is? Quite a profound writer.
She was on stage at MAD interviewing Yvonne Chenard, right? Yeah.
Amazing woman. She's been in Copenhagen for a very long time. And we were talking about the restaurant and moving forward. And I said, this way of cooking is a new way of cooking. You could go as far as calling it maybe a new style of cuisine. And all 5 of us are cooking this way.
But nobody's in Copenhagen.
Nobody's in Copenhagen, just us. There's one in Aarhus though, domestic. How do we put our stake in the ground now and say, we need to move in this direction? Even if you don't want to move in this direction, that's fine. But this is something. And she's like,
Claim it, yeah.
she's like, you have to name it.
Claim the linguistics here. And then and you start loading that term with all the things we discuss and all the other things you're going to do. And then it becomes a thing. Until it's a thing, it's like, oh, there's this super nice restaurant there and there's one there. Oh,
Yeah. But she's
and
like,
that's it. But it needs to be like Nordic cuisine became, or other movements became. People need to understand, okay, that's part of it because we like boxes. That's not.
Yeah.
And is that part of it or not? At least you can have a conversation about, does something fit in it?
Yeah. Because she's like, every time you talk about it, it's so ethereal. It's like, ooh, up in the clouds. She's like, you need
responsibility,
to like, yeah. You need to call it something. And then people can grab onto it. And then you go from there. And so that was a really interesting conversation. So this restaurant, along with my colleagues around that are also doing, like, we really want to start a movement. And movement is there's something that was in the topics that we talked about discussing. Movement was something I wanted to talk about because I think movement comes from the ground up. I don't think it's a top-down thing.
Grassroots. Yeah.
Grassroots, exactly. Because if we wait for the top down, it's never going to happen. And all policies and decisions made from the top are greatly influenced by what the population wants or needs or desires most of the time.
Let's say there is a potential or a very strong lobby power, obviously, in the current food and agriculture system. But unless we show alternatives and viable
demand,
commercial demand, people want this, normal people want this, not just geeks and like the geeks and gurus, I was going to say, but the geeks like us. And then why would you change policy? You must be a mad politician in any place. It's like, this is not gonna, but I think there's a massive piece there. Unless you have a shared voice and a shared, like, this is what we're doing and this is why it's different. We see that now with EARA in Europe, the European Alliance of Regenerative Agriculture, like, to show even that these farms exist, large and small, successful. There just came a fascinating report, I'll put it in the links below, on like how much photosynthesis extra these farms do, how much productions they do. It's not less, like the yield is on average, of course depends on the crop, 2% less.
Yeah.
With massively less inputs, no, like on livestock operations, no input brought from outside the region. And they're just much more functioning farms. And but to have that, because we keep saying it, but unless you put it down in Brussels or in Copenhagen or wherever the policymakers, like, they will end up listening, rightfully so, to whatever consultancy lobbyists came with a very nice PowerPoint or keynote talking about the input industry, how they feed the world. And unless we make a strong, like, no, and this is an alternative, not just no, this is wrong, because then why would you change policy if there's no strong voice?
And you also have to argue for the fact that if you can keep things closer, then that helps the local economy as a whole. So there's
jobs, inputs, like resources flows, apart from all the nice biodiversity and soil stuff, like this, like, you want your money to flow out of this country and out of this region constantly. You want people to follow that, because people leave the countryside specifically. And so these 5, let's say, you don't have a name yet, I'm imagining, for the movement, but this is going to be like really feels like the next phase of hospitality. Is that fair?
Yes.
And how are you envisioning to bring that beyond I don't know if the right word is fine dining, but to the rest of the hospitality, going from more, even hospitals or other places where food is being served, because that's where the numbers are, let's say, in terms of meals that are currently and could be amazing. Yeah. Like, how is or you're saying, I'm doing this restaurant now, let's get it up and running. And then, like, how do we engage with the rest of the hospitality world?
Exactly. No, let's get it up and running. How do we, but then the thing is, you have to build things outwards. So we need to make a strong case for what we're doing between us. And then, don't get me wrong, there is somewhat of movement in the hospitality industry is going in the right direction. I mean, I couldn't naively be saying that, because I probably exist in a little bit of a bubble with what I
goes to amazing farms, visits amazing restaurants, as all his friends run the coolest places with the best flavor. Now it's
and the different restaurants that I engage with, though, outside of Copenhagen, and there is, people are thinking like this. They just don't know how to do it, and I think that's the biggest thing. So this restaurant also, I might add, I have Endless Food Company, which is spun out of Amass, and that is a food-based research space where we are focusing on pretty much one product now, which is a chocolate made with no cocoa, which is made out of spent brewer's grain. So
Okay, that's
a whole other conversation.
yeah, no, but we're going there because
Put a bookmark there.
I will go back there.
Let me
Yeah.
finish this. So that's already existing. So we have done that, and I have no desire to start another startup. That is like, so this restaurant for me is also about creating a platform that is 100% open source and communicating about all the processes we're doing, how we're doing them, and giving it away to everyone. And that for me,
Patient, all the things.
everything from the lowest hanging fruit to the most technical parts of it, the whole spectrum, because everyone will be able to engage in a different way. And I think that, and I might be naive about this, but I think if people have more tools like that, they'll start to engage. Another way that I really want to engage in this to scale it is that there are a lot of restaurants out there that don't have the resources. I don't want to say resources. I don't say resources from a financial point of view because cooking like this doesn't cost more money. You're just cooking different things. You're not cooking.
You're talking about the mindset.
Exactly. And so, but there are restaurants out there that maybe don't have the space to do it. They don't have the time to do it, which is also not an excuse because it just, in the beginning to shift, there's a little bit of, but in the end, it's the same amount of time. So instead of making those restaurants feel bad about not doing it or whatever, what I want to build is a central processing unit, which we engage with food and beverage operations, whether it's canteens, hospitals, other restaurants, where we identify maybe their 3 largest side streams they're producing. Generally in restaurants, it's like citrus peels, coffee, and bread. We then take them back to our space, we process them for them, and then sell them back to them so they then can use them on their menu. Then all of a sudden, you don't have 5 restaurants talking about doing this. You have 20 restaurants in the vicinity of this CPU that are able to tell the story. I don't even care if they say they get it from us. They can say they do it. I don't care. But then there's a common narrative starting amongst the restaurant industry.
And there is economies of scale. Like once you've figured out this technique for lemon peel or whatever, or citrus and or coffee, it makes sense to do a lot more of it.
Yeah.
And not just your quote unquote, could be an enormous restaurant, but it's never going to be bigger than a nearby hospital or a nearby canteen, or like there are quite a few offices around here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of food going through that.
Yep.
And then you have that interaction or that almost interlayer between, okay, what happens in this kitchen is amazing, but how does it influence, apart from the people that visit, it actually starts to interact with, and do you have that space? Like, is it a restaurant almost plus production, or the production unit is going to be?
The production will come later.
Will come later.
Exactly. Because I also only feel like Amass was open for 10 years. We only really started to figure it out in the last 2 years. And if we've only started to figure it out in the last 2 years,
imagine now.
What's the potential of past that? Which is, so this is like the next version of that. Also, me personally, I've changed a lot in the last 3 years since Amass closed. I had new experiences, Southeast Asia, also just engaging with different chefs around the world, and that have really given me a new perspective on how to approach this. And at Amass, everything was like, we just do it and we don't care. But that's not a sustainable business model. Amass was a good business model. It could have been better. And I think you can't talk about doing all these things without a strong financial model behind it. Because if you can't prove that, then you can't scale it.
It's a natural bridge to the question we like to ask. Let's say we do it live. We're doing this conversation live in a theater or here at Nordhus in front of an audience of mostly, let's say, people in the financial world, which is a word I use broadly, either managing their own wealth, investing for other people, the pension side, institutional, etc. They have an amazing evening. Of course, there's amazing food, amazing slides. There's a good show, let's say, we put on. But you also know that the next day people forget these things. They're inspired and then they don't do. What would be a seed you want to plant? I love the metaphors, of course, that they remember the next day when they're at their desk or maybe talking with a colleague or something they should do, specifically investors in charge of a specific type of resource, in this case money. What would be something you want them to remember from an evening like this?
I think that first of all, from an evening like this, it's important to weed out the serious ones from the ones that are there just to make themselves feel better about what they've done in the past by being there and engaging in this. So it's important to weed those two groups out, because I would say a larger section of that would be the ones that are just trying to make themselves feel good.
Let's say 80-20 is probably fair.
Yeah.
Okay, the 20%, generous. 90-10, let's do it.
And then once you've weeded that group out and you have this 20% that is serious about this, then you probably will weed out another 10% just by explaining to them that if you choose to go down, this is not a VC style investment. This is
we lost half of the crowd. Yeah.
This is farming. This is producing food, which you only really get results once a year for the season. Maybe a couple times with subseasons and stuff like that. But essentially, it takes a year to get results and then adjust, and then another year.
And it takes maybe 8 years to figure out things in a restaurant, and the last 2, it starts to flow. Yeah,
exactly. So these are long-term investments. And these are investments that have the potential to have a huge return in the end. But it's not a return. It's not some dude in a dark basement with pasty skin computer programming that can just scale the next day. This is something that it's a long-term investment. I think you probably 10% weeding out, maybe 12 to 15%, and you're left with the 5% that are willing to go this way, which is fine. That's how you create a portfolio of people that are really into it. Because I think I was thinking about this a lot this morning before we talked about capitalism can be an amazing tool to move things forward. Do you know Helen Hollyman? She's based in Austin. You got to connect with her. Helen Hollyman. She basically, Munchies and Vice was her brainchild, and she ran that whole thing. She obviously left Vice a long time ago, and she's really in the regen ag space right now. And she's got a Substack that's great. But her and I always talk about how to hack the system of capitalism. Because capitalism, that's where the money is. So we do have to embrace that, and that will always be here. Everyone wants capitalism needs to die, blah, 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 blah. Capitalism, you can say a lot of bad things about.
It's been pretty resilient, so the chances are that there's a Lindy effect there. It's been around for a while. It's going to probably be around for another 5 to 10 years. 50? I don't know.
It's here to stay.
But it will be.
In the immediate future.
Yeah.
So
deal with
it. We need to deal with it and potentially use it to our advantage. The downside of capitalism
is summarize like the podcast, like this whole 380 episodes, yeah.
But the downside to that is that capitalism also kills great ideas. And I saw this firsthand. A friend of mine has an impact fund and only investing in kind of projects that potentially move the food system in the right direction. But they're also like hardcore VC investors. So if they see that a project is not performing over a certain amount of time, they actually pay to kill it. And these projects are not short-term, even mid-term projects. These are long-term projects. And so if a great project is going and then the investors decide to kill it before it reaches its potential, then you've lost something. And so there's this dynamic there that you really have to be careful of.
On this exec chair where you're sitting not so long ago, as in last week, actually, or Friday, the same time more or less, we had Thomas Högenhaven, I butchered the surname, of Planetary, passionately arguing for and showing that an evergreen structure, a long-term radical funder or fund attracts the most radical founders because they know it's going to be a long journey.
Yeah.
Still super commercial, but could be 20 years, could be 15 years. And why would you kill it at 7? Because you have to sell.
Yeah.
And the real impact comes at 12, 15, etc. I mean, like a mature agroforestry system. Why would you want to go out? Just because there's a financial system we created, a financial product, which is a fund, a VC fund that needs 3 years of investment horizon, maybe 10 years to total, maybe a few years extra if you're really pushing it. But basically, you start the next fund and the next raising and the next. We had Mike Velings of Aquaspark passionately saying the real impact happens after that. You'll be foolish to get out. Like the returns are there, but you need to build and not kill after 3-4 years because you don't see the exit after 7.
Exactly.
But then how do you raise enough money to do that?
And also, why does there always have to be an exit strategy? Why can't you we've gotten so caught up in this startup venture capital sphere that is all built on building and selling. Why can't we
Building,
just,
raising, and selling. Like
yeah,
that's the
building,
raising,
and selling. And it's like, why do we have in the end often at not a huge profit? Why can't we just build companies that run?
And you need capital for that, and there are ways to do that. But yeah, let's not cut out.
Why is there always an exit strategy? Like, why does that have
It's
to
like
be?
starting a marriage with the divorce in like already in the document. In
Yeah.
many cases, like you need to get out by this and this date.
Yeah, but also the scary part about the exit strategy is that often the people buying are the ones that just buy to shut it down because it's competition, and then there you are again.
Or an
can't we just-
acqui-hire, yeah, something. Yeah. So then coming back to, so that would be like a big message to the investment world in a theater or whatever stage we have. The returns are there.
Yeah.
Or will be there, but it's a long one. Let's not kid ourselves. This is a marathon to rebuild ecosystems, to rebuild mindsets in restaurants and hospitality, to regenerate. We degraded quite a bit everywhere, including between our ears. So it will take time to build and will take time to figure out. And so if you're in it, this means you're in it for who knows. Yeah. And yes, there's urgency. Yes, we should do a lot of things yesterday and today, and it's not that we can wait. This is not a, let's say, a message to then just wait and see what's happening. We need to get running now. And so then, like in this, so natural bridge actually, what would you do if you would be on the investor side? If you had a billion euros, which is, oh, my math is really bad, like a lot of Danish crowns, and you had to put it to work.
7 billion.
It could be a long-term, very long-term, permanent holding evergreen structure, but it has to be put to work, meaning that it comes back in some form later. Like you cannot be just, okay, I put $1 billion in lobbying in Brussels. That could be a small part of the portfolio, let's say.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking, obviously we're not giving investment advice, but I'm asking, like, what are your priorities? Because I'm curious from people in the space, and some people are like, oh, $1 billion. We are getting those questions now already. Like, what do you do with that kind of money? Because that's what's going to be needed, but then we need to be very strategic when those questions comes. What do you do? What are your priorities? What would be your, if you wake up tomorrow morning and like you open your bank account with a very specific mission, this has to be put to work. Matt, what would you do if you are $1 billion or euro investor?
For me, $1 billion is, it's almost a number I can't even comprehend in my head. So
That's why we chose it.
exactly. It's infinite to me. So first of all, setting up and establishing large-scale regenerative project with a educational aspect attached to it, because that correlation between chefs and farmers and farms and restaurants is really important. And there's also a necessity to involve everyone in the chain in this conversation, because you can produce all the regen veggies you want in the world, but if there's no one to buy it or no one that understands it, then
It's going to be pixie.
Exactly. And I think that there are some good examples out there of maybe not large scale, but regen farms that have popped up that are not super small, but not large in the hundreds and hundreds of hectares, but they have an educational aspect attached to it, which can fund the farm. And you have people coming through. That's why we just basically had this conversation like 20 minutes ago about this. But you can fund the project via educational avenues in charging for education. And a lot of people want to know this. Hospitality.
Education throughout the agritourism movement. People want to hang out on these places.
They do.
They want to taste it. They want to eat it. They want to smell it.
Also,
buy it.
Yes. But do that at scale. So this is not like 20 or 30 people coming. You set up an educational program that is like a year to 2 year program where people commit and they come there, they go to school there, almost like an agricultural education center where you are able to put people out into the world with the tools they need to practice this type of farming and influence.
So that's 100 million. Like what do you do with the rest?
Is that only 100 million?
I don't know. I don't think. I mean,
900 million.
It depends.
We can buy helicopters, fly everyone in. No, I'm joking.
I was thinking at least part of it should be an airport. We asphalt a big chunk, and then buying the land, depending on where you are, obviously, or long-term leasing it is a piece there. but it's not like there are farms of a few thousand hectares that could go into transition, are in transition and building education piece. It's not an endless, bottomless pit, I think. There will be some money left. If it's 500 or 700 or 900, I don't know, but it will be, you will have some money left.
So that's a great segue into the next version of this. So if there's an educational aspect of this too, and now there's money left over, 500 million, then
I see where you're going.
that 500 million becomes a fund. Okay? You educate people.
And they go.
And it's almost like, what do you call it? It's almost like a studio. Like
A venture studio.
a venture studio.
A farm venture studio.
Yeah. And so then, and this idea comes from, it doesn't come from me. Do you know who Eric Achenbauer is? He has Astonor.
Archimo, yeah.
So
he's a friend of the show, and we had him on, I'm going to say episode 250, but I'm probably wrong, but I will link it below.
Yeah. I've known Eric for many years, and I've been invited to some of I always call them like Illuminati gatherings of like 40 people in some castle in France or something. When it's like,
I know which gathering that was. David Montgomery was speaking.
But you just really get introduced to really interesting people. But in the first one, I met one of their main investments, something called Soil Capital.
Chuck Liedekerke. Shout out to Chuck, who was probably one of the first people on the show.
Yeah.
Definitely at the basis of this whole podcast. Yeah.
So I met them in the beginning when they were trying to do this, where they would go in, subsidize any losses that the farm have during transition, and then obviously for equity in the farm, and then boom, they're on their own. They're transitioned. So having a venture style studio attached to this that essentially can send people out into the world, or actually could bring existing farmers that want to transition into the space as well, and then help to support them in the transition until their transition. That's the setup I would do for, and there's lots of nuances around
it.
Yeah,
no. I mean, we're not asking for a business plan. We can ask ChatGPT to do that.
We can ask Eric.
We can ask Eric for sure. He thought about it. But I think that training experience plus then support when you start something somewhere, either a farm or hospitality, just to make sure, like almost a Y Combinator, like you've been through it, you've been through a program that, and at the end, when you're out of it, you're capable of doing this. And then if you come with, I want to start this in France or in Italy or in Singapore, and you're okay, there is potential financial backing and support and peer connections to then actually make it happen. Because not like, okay, you did this school, great, and now good luck, because we know how difficult it is to start some of these. Exactly. And I always wondered, with Richard Perkins and other great trainers, if I would be a large land investor or some interested in regen ag, I would sit next to that and just wait for which ones come through there, the best ones. Yeah. Okay, you're going to start in Luxembourg. Boom, let's go. Because they're really good at numbers, they're really good at regen farming.
Yeah.
From an investment perspective, that make it's a good filter.
Yeah. And it's also, you mentioned earlier that there is this money out there that's looking for a place to put it. They don't know how to. They can all just come to one place.
Just funnel it through.
Yeah.
And so in this new, like these 5 restaurants or the restaurant you're starting here, like how are you approaching the farming side of things? Like because we talked about the processes and how you approach the hospitality, or will approach when there's more processing, et cetera, in a bit of time. But then the other side, or the other end, or the beginning, or whatever we're going to call it, like how are you and how do you see your colleagues, the other, like say the group of Illuminati of the amazing restaurants, whatever we're going to call it, it's not going to be that. How are they and how are you approaching the farming side of things?
Well,
start your own farm? Or
I want to give a shout out to all of them
5.
first.
Okay, let's go. All 4. Yeah.
Domestic in Aarhus, Sim in Lisbon, Portugal, Silo in London, and Nola in Helsinki. Shout out. I know, I'll speak from my side, but I know they're on the same page. It's like pretty much you're not going to work with a farm unless you've been there and you've engaged with them and you see how their growing practices are. And there's a constant dialogue with the farmer that's happening. I think that's like baseline. Then there's, now I'll only speak for myself. When you're engaging with most of the time, a small scale farm, most restaurants are engaging with small scale farms. First of all, for me personally, when we touched upon this earlier before we started, there's no negotiation on price. The price is the price. Because I have this thing that rings in my head, so an experience I had when I was quite young, I must have been like 12. So none of this was in but I remember my parents are hippies who grew up in Southern California. And I remember, I think it was one of my dad's friends had a VW bus. And on the back, it had this cartoon character of this really sexy girl, voluptuous girl in a farming outfit with a straw hat on and stuff. And it says, "Fuck a farmer, everyone else does." And
Really good point. Yeah. Okay.
and so, but
whatever the price,
whatever the price is, that's the price. No farmer is driving a Lamborghini around. And they're not making shitloads of money. So the price is the price. That's what it costs them to produce it. Often the price is still too low for what it actually costs. And so don't negotiate on the price if you're getting vegetables from a small farmer. It's just don't do it. And I've seen chefs do it, and you're just like, what are you doing?
And how important is that financially, in terms of cost of margins, and because you're also saying, I want to show that this financially makes sense. Does it even matter if you negotiate in terms of running a full restaurant in terms of all the other the personnel costs, etc.? How important is the not input cost, that sounds wrong, but how important is it potentially to negotiate or to pay a bit more? Do you have space for that? Is it a small line on line item on your?
Well, it only doesn't matter if you do utilize the ingredient as a whole. Because if you're paying something and then throwing 30% of it away, you're paying a lot.
Yeah, you don't have space to pay more. Yeah. Fundamental piece. And so you're saying for vegetables, but are you engaging or planning to engage with larger scale farmers as well?
One of the farms we're going to engage with is, I would say, larger scale than, and a larger scale is maybe 100 hectares, which is a pretty large scale farm if you're operating it with 4 or 5 people. But they're doing everything how it should be done. And they're just recently, this is a recent move for them. They're actually in this transition period now.
Which is exactly when you want to help.
Of going from 20 or 30 hectares to 100. Wow. And so I want to be on that journey. And Laura from SEM, she puts a lot of really good content out. You should check her out. She recently put something up in the last few weeks where she's like, I understand the importance of working with organically certified farms. But I think it's equally important to support the farms that are not organically certified, that are going through the transition. That's more important because they're vulnerable.
The first 3 years is you get the same prices as before, especially if you're large at the commodity side, etc. You have no way of distinguishing yourself. Your practices are still being fine-tuned. You probably have some kind of yield pressure and weed pressure because your soil is what is happening? And that's a very vulnerable, very financially difficult moment.
And that was a extremely important point that she made. So yes, organically certified is important. It should be baseline, but you also have to support the ones that are going in that direction, even more so, because the people are already there. They're already charging more for their produce and people are buying it. It's this vulnerable state that, as you said, that 3-year transition period that we need to support those people.
Which is almost coming back to the financial piece. If you know that the customers are there afterwards, this becomes almost a finance question. We see some people in the US, shout out to Mad Capital, Perennial Fund, that are financing the transition to organic and then to regen organic as well. And because they have clients for ROC, there's certification around it. But it's difficult, it's not that easy. And then what are you gonna do on the nutrient side, the measurement side? Because some of these farms, I'm assuming, but it's not, I don't know if it's fair, that in that transition, they might not be at the top flavor yet. Or are they? And what are you doing with it? I also want the best on my table and on my kitchen counter compared to if somebody's still figuring out what regen means to them in the next couple of years. How do you deal with that tension?
From a flavor profile?
Yeah, flavor and nutrients and quality. Yeah.
I would never, let me see how to phrase this. Obviously, flavor is the most important thing to us. Through processes, you can also manipulate flavor out of things. We've talked about carrots quite a bit in the past. So the carrot, the dehy rehy carrot, is what we do is we take the carrot, we dehydrate it, and then we take loads of other carrots, juice them, reduce it to a very concentrated liquid, and then rehydrate the carrot. So this one carrot now tastes like 10 carrots concentrated. So even if we do that, I would say with a less flavorful carrot, we'll still get something that's way more flavorful than a normal carrot, like by 100-fold. And so there's ways around that. It's a great question because a lot of chefs would say uncompromised. I won't use any of their stuff. There's ways of.
But then you leave them hanging for the 3-4 years or whatever it takes to get to, okay, now I got the most flavor. And like, no, actually with processing, of course, if you start with horrible carrots, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you start with good enough,
Yeah.
on their way to, then you can use them for the juice, for the stuff.
Kimchi out of it. You can do different ferments and preserves. Everything, you more or less lactic ferment anything and dry it and grind it to a powder, and it's like the best seasoning mix you've ever had. So there are so many things you can do to still support that farm.
Really interesting answer. And then let's talk endless, because you bring this stuff out of the kitchen as well with a very specific, like only one product, or only, that's not negative, me meant, one product at the moment.
Yeah.
You mentioned it in passing.
One is to market already, actually, though.
And so what made you start Endless? Was that referred to, I don't want to do another startup? Is that Endless as a startup, or what's the...
I don't want to do another startup after Endless.
It's going to be Endless, yeah. Definitely not an exit, because if you're called Endless, that would be tricky. How did that start and happen? Because it's very different to start in the ingredient business.
So we started, Endless was what actually came out of Amass as the research part of it. And Max, who was my former head chef and head of R&D at Amass, and then Christian, who is the director of operations at Amass, the three of us broke this out and started Endless.
I love you have a head of R&D in the kitchen.
And so initially we were engaging with we were a company that was focused on taking the byproducts of industrial scale food production and taking them and turning them into new ingredients that these conglomerates could actually work back into their production. So for example, there's a plant-based dairy company called The Green Dairy based in Sweden. They produce hundreds of thousands of liters of oat milk to sell to China. They produce tens of thousands of kilos of oat residue after this production. We spent a year on a project with them where we took this oat residue, we turned it into 13 different plant-based dairy products, from yogurt to creme fraiche to ice cream and then over the year narrowed it down to 2 or 3 that they were okay, these are the ones that we see that we can use.
That makes sense, yeah.
And then we handed that off to them. We did it
as a consultant, basically.
As a consultant, yeah. We were hired guns.
Yeah.
Then we did a project with IKEA.
I'm going to remember this. I'm going to use it. Yeah, thank you for that.
Then we did a project with IKEA. And then we did our first project with a large bakery called Yamobi. They produce bread for hotels and grocery stores and SAS Airlines and pretty big. And they have a lot of bread that is either over fermented, the wrong shape to fit in the bag, all this stuff that they can't use. So 2 years before we met them, we had done this bread ice cream where we took leftover bread from Lily Bakery. We added a cocktail of enzymes to it to turn the starches to sugars. And then we used that liquid as a base to make bread ice cream. And then we started, Yamobi called us hey, we love what you guys are doing. We want to work with you. We don't know how. Let's have a coffee. So they came. And at first we were okay, let's take our lactic fermented and smoked tomato skins into a powder and put it through the bread, or lactic fermented kale stems and swirl it through the bread and season the bread. And you learn very fast, do not mess with Danish people's sourdough bread. Do not mess with it.
Bread is very important in this culture. I've found out. It's okay. So no tomatoes in your bread. Nothing extra fermented except for the sourdough starter. Yeah. Okay.
So then, in the second or third meeting after that, where we decided this is not, we were talking there, and Kim, who was my head of R&D at the time, we were wow, well, we did a bread ice cream. We hadn't even thought of that for some reason because we had done it so much earlier.
Because you didn't see not the waste, but you were thinking more on the product they were selling already, to how to infuse something into the bread that goes to the airline or to the...
So to not set up a whole nother production. So then we're okay, well, let's go for this bread ice cream. They were stoked on it. They're deliver us 25 kilos of your bread and we'll do a large scale batch of it. Because we would only make 5 kilos at a time max.
And they were how many tons do you want?
Yeah. So for 2 years, we worked on this with them. We would go to food shows and soft serve of this ice cream and all this stuff. But we just couldn't get it. Like, how do we get it to market? Like, how do we scale this? Because they make bread, we are chefs. First of all, chefs are experts at nothing. We know a lot of things, but we're experts at nothing. And so then all of a sudden, Marco, who was running MLB, is like, hey, I know the guys at Hansen's Is, which is a 100-year-old ice cream company in Denmark. Rasmus and his brother run it, and they're like third generation that run it. Rasmus is a madman. You call him, you're like, I want to dip one of your ice creams in miso. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Like, he doesn't care. Like, and so we called him up about this project, and he's like, yeah, let's meet. And for 2 years, two people that know nothing about ice cream couldn't get it to go anywhere. Within 3 months of talking with Hansen's East, it was to market. And so that was a collaboration. So the point of that is collaboration we found is like key, because we're not experts in ice cream. We're not experts in making bread. We're really good at.
But they would have never found each other.
Never. So, but we're really good at doing the middle part of turning something into something.
Could have been a bit faster than 2 years. But
yeah.
If somebody remembered, I know this ice cream, not small, they might be up for a crazy experiment. Anyway.
Yeah. And so that was our first product. So it went to market as a ice cream bar. So it was salted caramel sourdough ice cream dipped in chocolate, and boom, off to the races. You still buy it. They're just actually coming out with a new flavor with perfect segment into with thick. This isn't chocolate that we're doing at Endless. So Endless is now more or less primarily focused on this product that we're making called Thick, THIC. This isn't chocolate. And this is
not. People not. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a product that is made out of spent brewer's grain. 4 million tons a year produced in Europe alone of this product, spent brewer's grain. So,
which goes now biogas if you're lucky.
Animal feed and biogas. And a lot of animals can't process. The fiber is locked, so it passes through them. I think cows can process it, but pigs cannot.
Which suggests you need fermentation. Or not.
You need to be able to unlock the fiber, or you need to split the fiber from the protein. And there are processes there are other companies that do that as well.
4 million, okay. So you have enough raw ingredients.
I think we have enough right now. So
how did that come about? Did you thought, let's turn that into?
Well, it came from Amass, because we were at a fine dining restaurant. There's two things that people think have to exist in a fine dining restaurant. One is coffee, one is chocolate. We haven't figured out coffee yet. Chocolate.
I know a company in the Netherlands. I don't think they're listening, but shout out to, I think it's Northern Coffee or Northern. Anyway, they're on their way. I've tasted some of it. It's getting there.
Yeah.
It's getting there.
There's a company in Denmark as well doing it as well. And I think, not to go off track, but in the new restaurant, we're going to serve regular coffee side by side with it and give people the option to order either or.
And sometimes not tell them.
We'll put it down and say, guess which one.
Taste it.
Because the one in Denmark, I can't recall the name right now, but it's being developed at Cost Studio, is the best version I've ever tasted. And it's brewable. Like, a lot of them are cold. Like, it's already made liquids. This is dry and brewable. So it's interesting.
We're getting there. I think
we're close. We're not far off.
So, okay, so chocolate and coffee. Coffee is being worked on, but chocolate wasn't.
So then the existential question is, are you replacing a product or an experience?
Because the easy way out is just to buy the best bean-to-bar chocolate
which is
directly
not
from.
What we're trying to replace. Because generally, like Friesholm chocolate in Denmark, to me, best chocolate in the world. He is paying way over market value for these beans. He is supporting very small farmers, and everything about that chocolate is the right way to do it. We're not replacing that chocolate. Miko, we're not replacing your chocolate.
But it does raise the question, the experience versus the product.
Yeah. So we are trying to replace shitty chocolate.
Which is probably, let's be generous again, 90-10. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
80-20, no, 90-10, 95. Like
95,
it's starting
97.
It's starting to get better, but I think people underestimate the horrendous, coffee and chocolate similar, probably. Growing practices, impacts, colonialism, exploitation, extraction, etc., etc., etc. Super interesting plans, because there is a world of quality.
Yeah.
We've had quite a few conversations on the podcast around that. Like, there's an inherent world of quality now, and to a certain extent, like if you grow it, of course, shade, agroforestry systems, etc., you don't need to prove that the nutrient density is higher, etc. No, if you can grade it, you can find a market for all your coffee beans.
Exactly.
But it still doesn't mean it's probably 3% or so.
So
Replace shitty chocolate.
we're trying to replace shitty chocolate. And we're also we have no desire to make a bar and make a brand. We are 100% B2B. And so we are really trying to get into this, and we are producing it at the same price right now. And we're not even to scale. As soon as we scale, it'll drop below the cost of chocolate.
Which I think is such and then we're going to unpack it, fundamental piece in a lot of these fermentation or replacement games. Like a lot of people in our space, in the region space, get very upset on precision fermentation milk or other. First of all, the goal is to replace shitty, which is,
I have my opinion
again,
on that.
let's say 97, 98, etc.
Yeah.
Not to replace the absolutely outstanding examples we have in all sectors. And there's an option to cut it out in price, which means you disrupt the horrible dairy industry, the horrible chocolate industry, Of course, there is a potential side effect there if it really crumbles, literally. Like what happens to the farmers in Togo that currently farm, unfortunately, shitty chocolate because nobody has invested in them for over 2 decades. But we still need that, because the chocolate demand is going up.
Yeah.
And so you can't...
It's not going down.
And it's not going down anytime soon unless we have a horrible chocolate...
And chocolate
scare.
prices, I don't know if you follow that,
Exploded in the last few years.
anywhere from 600 to 1,000 back down to 600 to 800, percent over.
So if you're running an ingredient business where there's no way you're going to differentiate with your amazing chocolate or cacao beans bought from this cooperative, etc., you're pretty screwed because it goes up and down. Yeah. Okay, so unpriced meaning you can really undercut if you scale.
Yes, and that for us is important. And the only way we've been able to do that is because the food tech space, I'll go on a little rant about the food tech space because I spent some time after Amass closed in that space because I wanted to understand it. It's important. It needs to be there. It's innovation. So I wanted to spend some time and I listened to some pitch decks and advised a couple funds on potential investments. And I remember sitting with one of the guys that, I won't say his name or the fund, and I was like, all right, he was a good guy. And I remember looking at him and going, after we listened to a pitch online, I was like, this is all like a Ponzi scheme, right? And he's like, you're not far off. But it made me really start to be critical of what people were starting to innovate. And the problem is you can make first of all, everyone is way too caught up in IP.
Coming back to your open source point you made before.
Way too caught up in IP. So what that forces companies to do is to create processes that are so complicated so they can create IP to raise money for something that will never be scalable.
Because it's so complicated.
Because it's so complicated. So the investment world has pushed the food tech industry into this space in order to raise money. Now you're seeing a pushback because these absorbent evaluations that we had in 2018, 2019 are being, most of those, Oatly being one of them, Beyond Meat, just plummeted. Their value plummeted because
it's not there.
It's not there.
Yeah.
And so,
it's also not a tech company or a software tech company.
Yeah, they can
with
be
one
scaled.
guy that's scaled with 18 people, you sell WhatsApp to
Yes.
to Facebook. These are real production factories we're talking about.
And so now you're seeing a lot of these kind of food tech-based funds that are being very squeamish about investing in heavy IP products. We chose to go the opposite direction. We chose to get to market as quickly as possible. And if you look at every other alt chocolate company out there, there's maybe 5 or 6 that are out there. None of them are to market to the scale we are. And because we have IP, but it's not based in crazy bioreactors and precision-based fermentation, whatever that means. Let me tell you, if anyone says they're doing precision-based fermentation, most likely it's a type of fermentation that's been done for 1,000 years.
It's probably to IP it.
Used term. It's such a used term right
Coming from someone that knows fermentation inside out and the potential. And so now at what scale are you and how difficult was it to get into these supply chains? Or actually, they're like, okay, this tastes pretty much the same or better, has a nutrient profile that fit in my chocolate cookie or in my whatever it ends up being into, and it costs the same. Great, give me a batch.
We're into it's under the radar, and I appreciate it how they're doing this, but we are one of the biggest kind of chain, I'm being careful with my words here, one of the biggest convenience store chains in the world, but we're only in the Nordics right now, is using all of our chocolate in its cookies. And they chose not to tell anybody about it and just replace it, which I love. Because
But if you look on the ingredients, do you see?
no, they're loose. They're loose cookies. Yeah. And so that is amazing because they're like,
And nobody complained.
They've been 6 months now, they've been buying and making. Not one person has said anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and I really appreciate that tactic because as soon as you label something, you give people a preconceived notion of how it's going to taste. They're going to be critical of it.
Or extra. Yeah,
Exactly. So
I remember somebody using some kind of meat replacement for chicken, I think, and like with satay, which is like a peanut-based sauce, and it tasted better, honestly. And like he wasn't using it because in Netherlands you can say satay, and everybody imagines that it's chicken.
Yeah,
so he didn't lie.
Yeah.
But on like these buffets, like for big.
Well, these cookies are called
catering.
light and dark cookies. No.
Yeah, so for catering, like nobody ever asked. Of course, you need to watch out because if there's somebody soy allergic, etc., there's a piece there. But it worked better with sauce. It was way cheaper, way less complicated to get properly, and like why not?
Yeah.
And so you're saying 2 products, or all our attention is now on chocolate, not chocolate.
Yeah.
Are you then developing others? Because I think chefs, by definition, are interested in that development piece as well. Not necessarily, okay, how do I scale the biggest potential factory to turn into this stuff and open a location in Germany because that's a big brewer country or not? Like, how do you, of course, you're setting up a restaurant, but how do you split that almost attention or that time now? Because now if you hit it, like the impact's going to be enormous if you just keep scaling this company.
Well, I'm lucky enough to have, like Max and Christian are running the day operations in that. And we've built a team as well. I think we have 5 people employed for us now for a startup, which is, I was like, oh shit, we're
a company.
People. Now we're a company. So they're running the day-to-day and they're doing an amazing job.
And so next things you're looking at, things you can share, obviously, or you're excited about in the same realm, okay, what to potentially disrupt next?
Well,
or you say, okay, actually not for the next couple of years, we're just going to scale this and hit the biggest
right now,
impact.
The chocolate for the next couple of years is it because I know we can get that to a very large scale. And we were already getting approached by, there's a large it's organically certified as well, the not chocolate. But we're already getting, most recently, a very serious inquiry. So serious, the fact that they said their logo with our logo on a mock box. He does organic granola in Germany and sells a lot of it. And so he's really interested
organic
in
market in Germany is. And so why now? Why is this now possible in the chocolate replacement space compared to a few years ago? Is it technology? Is it technique? Is it the team that came together? Because there have been some companies working on or have they been mostly focused on complicated IP and VC returns? Why is this now and not 5 or 10 years ago? Or what?
Well, I think the alt chocolate's important because there has been a lot of attention on the downsides of inexpensive chocolate production. As you mentioned, from a labor point of view, how people are, the cost point of view. There was a statistic that came out, I don't know how long ago, it's probably out for a while, I just saw it for the first time, where like what you pay at the end for chocolate represents only 5% of that actually goes to the farmer. And you're like, what?
And it's not such a processed ingredient,
Yeah.
Okay, and so it almost sounds like there's a combination of momentum, attention, price craziness, which helps to probably wake up a few large food companies like, okay, what's happening to our ingredient?
Yeah.
And to shift gears and to ask a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Before we go past that, because you just made me think of something. We did a survey a while ago to all the people that were buying the chocolate, because we're selling it to loads of bakeries in town and stuff like that. And it was, why do you choose to use this? And in my brain, when we sent this out, I was like, oh, it's all going to be about the sustainability part of it, blah, 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 blah. 80% said it was for the innovation. the innovate, the fact that it was a new product that they wanted to work with, which I was not expecting that.
So speaking on that, like what are you thinking about as next steps, or as I asked before, like double down on this for a while? Because that requires all the attention, of course, as well. Like how do you scale something to this to hundreds of tons and the batches and the this and the that? Or are you like, I'm actually already innovating with, not coffee, but something else that we want to tackle next?
As I said, like we really need to get this like to a certain point where it's really scaled up. We had a meeting with Nestle a while ago, and someone made the comment like, oh, if we just replace 2 to 3% of all your chocolate and make like a hybrid, the impact of that would be huge. And actually the woman from Nestle was like, I actually don't see it like that at all. I see it that chocolate itself in 20 years, itself, no matter the quality, is a super luxury product. And this replaces all of everything else. And I was like, well, that's also
So the 95 or 97 won't exist, or will be this.
Yeah, exactly.
And the high quality remains.
Exactly.
And so a question we'd love to ask, inspired by John Kempf, definitely an agronomist, farmer, and guru in our space, and deep thinker and farmer.
I love farmer philosophers.
It's actually a series we've been making, the Farmer Philosophy series, because we've seen so many farmers on the regen path. They turn, I'm going to say surprisingly, but not really actually, super philosophical. Because there's a mental shift there, or mindset shift. And we've done a series on the regen mind as well, that is needed to go from waking up and killing everything pretty much, except for your one monoculture cover crop. I'm making this very black and white. Going from, now how do I facilitate life on a farm? How do I get more complexity? How do I deal with, and that's a massive internal shift. And we've just basically put microphones on people and asking philosophical questions, also about the farm, but walking it, like walking the land with a farmer, and it gets philosophical very quickly, which is just fascinating.
I love that.
John is definitely an example of that, but he likes to ask, where do you think differently, or what do you believe to be true about regenerative agriculture that others don't? So where are you a bit contrarian in your thinking? And in this case, take it wherever you want. Could be in the sustainability chefs movement, but also in regen food and ag. Where are you? We have heard a number of things, but what came up when we sent these questions?
So as much as I love the philosophical point of view, I'll retract back to a more data-based answer.
Please do.
And the only reason that people don't understand this is because we don't have enough data yet to understand it. And is, for me, the thing that people don't understand about regen ag is that there is such a connection between the soil and our own personal microbiomes that is such a barely scratched the surface of what that means. And and I was listening to Zach Bush talk about this a while ago, and he made such an interesting comparison. He's like, our knowledge of the relationship between our gut and the soil is the equivalent of our knowledge of surgery in the 1600s.
And he knows. We had him on, and then we hosted a conversation at Groundswell with him and Bickley, which I'll put in the links below because it's just hilarious. It's so, that connection, like we say your gut feeling, and we've done 25, 30 episodes probably about healthy soil leads to healthy produce, leads to healthy gut systems, healthy people and healthy ecosystems, like that line. But you'd be surprised how many people, even in our space, no idea. Yeah. They were like, I've literally had conversations with people that have been 15, 20 years in this space, invested hundreds of millions into agroforestry systems for the big chocolate guys. And he was like, it would be great if there's research on this. I'm like, there is a lot. Yeah. And every day we see more. Like, this is not a hypothetical thing. This is a real peer-reviewed, a lot of studies in all kinds of, from the tomatoes to the grains to the meat, like to the milk. You can, like this, so like how you farm influences.
But this is a bigger question of how, and I have this conversation with my wife all the time. Usually just me talking at her and her just
It sounds like a conversation, not really.
Yeah. How is the conversation about food and what we eat and where it comes from not the most important conversation that everyone is having? How is that true? It is the only thing that we do that directly affects eating, I'm talking about, that it directly affects us like instantaneously. Our guts, our brains, everything about us. How have we gotten so far away?
Disconnection, as Zach and John like to call it.
Yeah, that a normal household is not even talking about this. It's crazy. And the thing, the data is out there. It's all out there. Like, how are people?
So we don't need more data, like you just said. We do. Like,
we need more data. We definitely need more data because we know that it's affecting it, but we don't know the depth of the nuances of how it's affecting it. There is still so much more that we're going to learn about what's actually happening in our guts and how it affects our brain function, how it affects. There's even a conversation about that.
I know where you're going, I think. Yeah.
Our guts are a part of our conscious being.
They call it the second brain.
But
or first,
yeah,
depending on you. Yeah.
But I love the conversation about how our body is made out of like 90 billion microbes and that are acting autonomously in our bodies. So then who's actually in control?
Yeah. Who is you? Who is you?
Who are
actually?
you?
Yeah.
You are made up of...
We're an hour and 40 in and we get into, are you part of nature or not?
Consciousness.
Which is such a fundamental piece. And then because I remember we had, not to name drop, I hate to do this, but Franco Fubini of Natura on, that many of the chefs they work with don't know that even. Like, of course they look for flavor. Yeah. So in your world of chefs, I mean, you're part of many worlds, but let's say the world of chefs, how can we have that connection more, that a tomato is not a tomato, it could look like, comes from a magazine picture, or it could actually taste like something which almost by definition means the farmer's done something very interesting. Yeah. But that notion of these two things, they might look the same, but they're almost a completely different product. Like you can't compare them.
Exactly.
And farmers, chefs are like, of course, flavor. No, but it's because of seeds and management. Yeah. Those are the two, farm management.
Nutrition is directly related to flavor.
Yeah, but those two things together, that then Barbara keeps hammering, like this is the same thing. Yeah. Of all people, chefs should be there. Like the first one, like, of course, I know, I got this in school, or I got this in the first kitchen I worked in.
School is the root of the problem. That is not taught in school.
Which is crazy.
I've been spending a lot of time in the educational space in the last 6 months. And there are many things that are not taught in school that should be taught in school. One is the direct relationship between nutrients and flavor. And how do you get nutrients into something? So there's a gentleman who Sasu Lakonen. He's Finnish. He used to have a restaurant called Ora in Helsinki.
I'm getting a whole list of people where you're going to hear them after Matt makes the introduction. Yep.
Sasu did a great project, an EU-funded project, where it was a culinary school and an agricultural school, and they made the chefs and the farming students switch positions for a certain amount of time. And it was...
I'm getting goosebumps. That's very interesting.
Yes.
And then if you then add like a medical school to it and you make the three of them rotate, because there it's the same. You get an hour on nutrition maybe in your whole career, 2 hours. Let's be generous, 5.
Yes.
And but those 3 can change our food system.
Which is ironic because you probably get more education on nutrition in chef school than you do as a doctor. But it's direct nutrition. It's not where does the nutrition come from. I think that's the missing key. How does something become nutritious? The process to get there. Then you unravel the whole farming agriculture behind that.
The soil needs to be alive. There are certain bacteria in the soil that if they make it into the carrot are extremely important for your mental health, etc.
Exactly. What types of soil give what types of nutrients based on what type of vegetable you're growing. It's infinite. The variables.
We could do so many other directions, but I'm going to also slowly wrap it up and ask you a question we love to ask, which usually leads to other questions, actually. If you had a magic wand, so we take away your fund of $1 billion, we are, let's say again, doing this in a theater in front of an audience, and you could change one thing. Of course, it's an impossible question because we have a super complex system with everything is interrelated, but I'm interested what are nodal points of intervention. And of course, it's an Aladdin question, so you cannot rub it and you get 3 extra rounds, you get 1 wish. most people then say, but then I would do these two things. I'm like, no one. What would you do if you had that magic wand? And tomorrow morning we wake up in a different world because Matt said, tomorrow X happened.
Yeah. So it's a very simple answer, which this one answer I agree or I believe would affect the entire system. And I would remove glyphosate and any other herbicide and pesticide in that family from.
So the fungicides are okay? No. Trick question. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
You and I would remove them from our conscious mind that they ever existed.
How could we ever allow this to be fine?
Exactly. And what that would do would force the rest of agriculture into adapting and dealing with the issues that these things solve. Because at this point, glyphosate is in all of us. No matter if we only eat organic, it's in the air, it's in the water, every person on the planet Earth has some.
You've been listening to Zach, yeah.
Glyphosate. Yes. And by removing that, first of all, you would, as I said, it would force innovation into a way of farming, whether it's regen or maybe we discover a new way of farming, we don't know, but it would force us into that. It would also solve, I would say, a large percentage of health issues in the world. Because we know we're eating glyphosate and we know glyphosate is poison. And so
I did a test in the Netherlands, actually done by Volkert Engelsman, who we had on the show as well. Like you could pee in a pod, send it, and then it would tell you the level of glyphosate. And it was quite low with me, luckily, because I was scared.
But not non-existent.
Not non-existent, but they also said something else interestingly, like if it was scarily high, go on an organic diet for a month and retry just to see the effect. Yeah. Again, it wouldn't go to zero because you can't escape it. And just, I think, I'll put it in the show notes, this week a big research out of Italy came from, I don't remember the name, it's an institute close to Bologna, independently funded. I think we even put some money in the crowdfunding because they didn't want to be funded by either the industry or the progressive industry in that sense, like they have been lobbying against glyphosate for so long because they wanted to do an independent study. I haven't read the study, it was on animals, but I've seen a lot of things pop up on social media on the results. Henry Rowland, who we had on, was very vocal, has been very vocal on hair testing and et cetera, on pesticide. And it's not pretty. Like it's very clear, meta study, this is poison. And not to say, how do we transition as fast as possible? Could be overnight, could be, you can cut it tremendously in a couple of years. Like this is not a given. And let's not replace it with something else even worse because there are cocktails out there that are even more poisonous. So that's a simple answer which would shock the system into change probably.
It's like a root that would spawn into like numerous other changes from that, which I think were important. I also think it's important to point out that because people are quick to chastise people and to knock them down if they're trying to move in the right direction and maybe they're still doing this, but they've gone in the right direction, is that everything is a process. Like this whole transition is going to be a process. And yes, we all want it to happen now, but that's not the reality of the world. No. It has to.
We have a magic one.
Except, yes, ding.
And that's why it's called magic.
Exactly. And so I think we need to embrace the process and be positive about it instead of lashing out at people. The amount of people that I would say lash out at me about certain things that I say or think, I'm just like, first of all, I don't know you, so I actually don't care what you think. But
it's
second
interesting.
Of all, let's just embrace the process.
Like in system change, I think the activists or the pioneering species, let's say in the syntropic agroforestry, are very quick at commenting on others in a sense, instead of acknowledging that it's not perfect, it's a process. We got way further than we've ever been, or there's so many steps already taken.
We're all the same team.
And there is still 97% or 98 or 95 in whatever sector or context you're in. The rest hasn't made big steps yet or steps. So let's focus on that instead of commenting if that farm is absolutely perfect or that I saw that chef throwing away something. Or like, okay, there was a plastic bottle somewhere, which shouldn't happen, but there is a much bigger process in saving more than 100 liters a day or he or she is flying everywhere. Again, not saying that that's fine, But there's a process here. There's a process of massive steps, and we're just getting started. And we're very quickly to criticize each other in that front runner piece, because it's sort of part of that.
Well, it's always like I'm in front, or it's ego driven.
Yeah, but we need, it's ego driven, and it's also very not relevant because we're talking to each other instead of the other 97 to get them going.
Exactly.
And that infighting is not going to help. Like, is regen better than organic? Is that what need to be certified? Unless it's organic, it cannot be that. Okay, agroecology. And it's all true, but all the time we lose it talking to each other, we're not making other change.
Yeah. Well, Cindy from Foodprint Nordic has a great approach on this, and because the Organic Society is quick to criticize the regen ag. But Cindy is like, you know what, let's not lash back at them. She's like, we can learn a lot from the organic movement. They've done.
We're standing on their shoulders.
Heaps. We're standing.
People are learned to look at a label. Like, nobody did that before.
So let's embrace what they've done and then just take it and build on that, which was amazing, because I remember because I sat on the board for Foodprint Nordic, and
I made the intro, so thank you, Cindy. Yeah.
Yes, shout out to Cindy. But I remember we'd have this conversation, and my initial response was like, why are they being? She's like, no, it's fine. Let's embrace what they've done.
It's fine, and there is a sense, and their regen somehow, and I don't think we still figured out why, is hitting a nerve that organic never has. Yeah. And it's being greenwashed, and it's being taken, of course, but it's also, and it's questioning how far organic has come, especially the large-scale industrial organic, where you can ask a lot of questions about. There are better conventional farmers in terms of soil health than there are the worst organic ones. Yeah, exactly. And there are way better organic ones, of course. So it questions a lot of things on process versus outcome. Like you start to ask a lot of questions, like, did it lead to better soil health and better quality? And some in the organic movement have really good answers to that, and some are like, oh yeah, but we just swapped inputs and thought it was fine. Yeah. So it really, like, it creates a lot of questions, which is only good, but also a lot of sensitivity of the attention regen gets, and suddenly buyers talking about it, which of course is interesting. But there's funding coming in, investors are excited, there are movies about it, and there's all this buzz, and it's only possible because organic was there and has built it for 100 years, not because this could have never existed, but it is another wave, and it is catching, and you can choose. You surf it or you don't.
Exactly. Well, in all of your conversations, organic is clearly labeled and certified.
In most places, yeah.
There's not really that in regen yet.
Okay, we're 1 hour and 52 in, and now we're getting to a rabbit hole. Okay.
Well, just because I don't have the answer to this, and maybe I don't know enough about that process, but in your conversations, is that coming? Is it hard to measure? Why hasn't that come yet?
Probably both of people have been working on attempts to do that. There's ROC, Regen Organic Certification, push.
Is it government sanctioned? Because I think it's important.
On top of organic, it's mostly Dr. Bronner's, Rodale, and Patagonia, and very really the golden standard, what they look at. Of course, there's things they don't look at, but really organic is the baseline, and then we go beyond, because there's no animal welfare in organic. There's no, in the US at least, there's no, et cetera, et cetera. Farm workers' practices, things like that. Fundamental pieces. Of course, it's costly to do that. Often the issue with certification is that the cost is on the farmer again. And so if you have a great market who wants to pay for that, and then you can just factor in the cost, great. But if it's not there...
Investors should invest it, because then their prices double, and then...
Of course. So I think there's attempts there. Of course, how do you capture something as complex, and you've been on many farms, as a regenerative transition into a yes or no certification, very binary, 0-1, there's an immense debate about if that's even possible, because it's a journey, and it's a this, and what's the baseline, and what do we actually measure outcome? Okay, we're going to measure soil health. Great. Looks completely different 20 kilometers from here versus 1,000. So how do you do that context specific? I think we're going to have a lot of issues with trying to capture it into one number. Okay, you're regen because you're above 80 or something like that. We're going to see attempts in that. We're going to see people say, I will pay extra if there are these 5 or 6, or if you do from these 10 different practices, you do 5, and you don't do others. And we know it's a process.
We keep
I think what we're also going to see, and I don't know enough about it, we're going to do an interview probably in autumn, is people-based, relatively local certifying by other people, in a sense, by other farmers, by people that really know. How do you make a trust-based system that is scalable? We've seen that, I think, in South Korea quite a bit, that doesn't cost extra. But still, as Matt, the chef, you're buying from people that are certified by this movement, and it's good. And it's way better than anything else, but there's no costly third party that has to do it. Again, I'm butchering the terms because I don't really know how it works, but I've seen examples of that. I think it's called PSG, which sounds like the Parisian football club, but it's not. I will put some in the show notes. Like, how do you do this at a level and a scale that makes sense for farmers? Because we know many farmers are too small. They don't like the certification because one guy comes up, has a checklist, has never heard about agroforestry, and then says, yes, you're fine. Yeah. And like, as long as your manure is certified organic coming from elsewhere, you're okay, even if there's microplastics in it. So, but I think there are solutions there to do it actually much more decentralized, much more trust-based, and still effectively work. Like, okay, I need good stuff, and I need to make sure there's no literal shit in it. So I think I don't think we're going to see a global, as we've seen with organic, because that's process-based. If you do this and this, you're fine. Not outcome-based. Yeah. I mean, we are in a studio, thank you, Rasmus, but we don't need perfect quality in that sense, so absolutely fine. So I think there we're going to see innovation, more local probably, decentralized, and we're going to see some attempts which might work or not work with bigger certification, because some companies need that, because I'm an organic supermarket, how am I going to deal with this regen stuff that is on top or not, or some people are still using something or fungicide, what am I okay with that? Or but they're in a process, that's great, but I need to buy. And so I think that we can do a conference of a week just on certification, because it's such a journey. And how do you
it's also like a minefield as well, like,
oh my God.
Especially if it's
such a business model as well for certifiers.
If it's a private certification, because I just always think of like MSC, which is such bullshit. It's like, it doesn't mean anything. People buy the certification. It's like of course, if people like Patagonia are involved, you know that they are like...
Yes, but still it could be very
serious.
Like, what does it do for the farmer? Is it another checklist and things they have to fill out? Is it or is it something that is integral part of their management? Because they already need to do, if you're in a subsidized country, you need to fill out an amount of forms that don't make any sense for you to get anything. So I'm always worried about, but
what's the value added? Yeah.
But I know we figured it out in some places around this, like on more local food system wise, okay, how you make it trust-based, but still strong enough that you kick out the things you don't want, because there needs to be some kind of penalty otherwise. Yeah. So I will report on that, and we'll do some interviews.
But the certification is one thing, but educating people on what it actually means is even harder, because most people don't even know what regenerative agriculture means.
And do we need to, or is it it's such a...
Yeah. Sorry to open that can.
No. It's a really good question, because like, where we don't just certify it like organic, and then, which took 40 years in most places to do as well. Like, we know people that were some people in the original organic movement are horrified by it because it simplified it so much. And actually they were on a complex journey, and now it's these 10 questions or 50 or whatever, and you have to pay for it now suddenly to be called organic. Like, why is that? So we can ask a lot of questions if that's possible and relevant, but it got us to where we are. But it got us to 6, or in this case, 10% of the country of the stuff bought here, which is like after 40, 50 years. Okay, how do we get to 20, which is the tipping point, or 30, 40, 50? How do we?
Even a place like Denmark, where it's like 10% max of everything that's grown and sold in Denmark is organic. You'd think Denmark is so progressive, but the problem is 80% of what's grown in Denmark is animal feed. So you'll never get to that high point here, because the majority of what's grown here is for animal feed.
Unless you fundamentally change the food system.
Exactly.
I want to wrap up. Thank you so much, Matt. This could go on for another few hours, but we won't. So thank you so much for the work you do, for coming on in this very busy time. You're opening a restaurant soon, working on disrupting the cacao, the chocolate business, the chocolate world and industry, and so many other things, culinary schools and other things we didn't discuss. So thank you for taking the time, coming here and sharing your journey with us.
No, thank you for having us. I also think you guys are doing amazing work, because you mentioned before that you didn't have an interest in being a farmer or a chef, but it's like, I think having these conversations is equally as important as both those. So thank you.
We're trying to play our role in this complex ecosystem, and our role is to ask a lot of questions, silly questions, and connect and share that learning journey.
The sillier the questions, the better.
Sillier the question, the better.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end. For show notes and links discussed, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend? And get in touch with us on social media, our website, or via the Spotify app, and tell us what you like most. And give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or your podcast player. That really, really helps us. Thanks again, and see you next time.